Welcome to Office Centurion. I'll be your guide. Today we are doing the third part of session 14 of the Council of Trent. We will be looking at chapter 1 of Extreme Unction, and we will also be looking at the session 14 canons. So chapter 1 of Extreme Unction, also known as Anointing of the Sick, we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 6, verse 13. And they cast out many demons, and anointed with oil many who were sick, and healed them. Then let's look at James chapter 5, verse 14. Is any one among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. Care of the sick and dying have to do with remission of sin and peace of the soul, not so much with the healing of the body or with healing the sickness of the person, the illness. This sacrament is about giving peace of mind to the dying. This act of faith is a task of priests and bishops. So for those who are wondering, traditionally, meaning in the Catholic and Orthodox sense, what it means to pray for the sick, it is not so much that they get better, but that their suffering is added to the suffering of Jesus so that they may go to heaven. It's so that way they are suffering for others and not just for themselves. I know that might seem weird to a lot of Pentecostals or to a lot of atheists, but that's how that works. So it's about asking for them to have peace of soul and that they may be forgiven for their sins and be reconciled to God before they die, so that they can die in a state of grace. Session 14, Canons. Canon 1. Penance is a sacrament in the Catholic Church instituted by Christ for reconciliation. Canon 2. Baptism is not penance. Chapter 3. Matthew 16:19 and John 20:23 are talking about confession, penance, and reconciliation, but not about preaching the gospel with authority. Canon 4. Contrition plus confession plus satisfaction equals penance, but guilt or shame plus faith does not equal absolution. The fifth canon of session 14. Sorrow is a real state and freely expressed. It is not a sign of hypocrisy, but it is a sign of regret. So if you're feeling sorrow, that doesn't make you a hypocrite for what you've done. It shows that you regret what you have done. Canon 6. Confession and its results are not a human contrivance. Canon 7. Penance is required for the remission of sin. Penance and confession is not merely nor solely for instruction, but is a true act and sacrament. Notice that it says is, not are. Both parts are part of one act. Canon number 8 of session 14. Confession is required at least once a year, best done during Lent. Canon 9. Absolution is a judicial act on the part of the priest. Canon 10. And this we're going to look at John chapter 20, verse 23. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld. Secret sins and voluntary confession alone are not enough. An objection from the Protestant perspective may be that in their opinion, the universal priesthood is refuted by this canon. Basically because all people can forgive. You all have the power to hear someone's final confession right before they die. But this canon came off as the council trying to hold on to power and authority and might conflict in attitude with Vatican II and with the current Catechism of the Catholic Church. Because here what it's saying is that the job of this act, the vocation of this act is reserved for the priest. So ordinarily in common practice, it is prescribed for the priest or the bishop to do this. Now, as an act of mercy in extreme circumstances, sometimes what's called an exception or extraordinary circumstances or extraordinary means, anyone can do this. It is your job as a Christian to hear someone's sins and forgive them. Yeah, that's the good news. You've been forgiven. You have a way to heaven through Jesus Christ. In fact, it's the only way. All right, Canon 11. Bishops have the right to reserve a case for themselves over a mere priest. So if it's a major sin that they're confessing and there's time to get a priest, you go to a priest. And if the sin is extreme enough, grave enough, I guess would be the right word, then it's reserved for a bishop if the bishop chooses to be the one to hear that confession. Then we get to Canon 12, and I said, it's unclear and confusing. My understanding, pardon, satisfaction, and absolution are not transactional. God forgives whom he wills. This is not an act of faith. So I recommend going into session 14 and rereading Canon 12 yourself. Canon 13. Living a new life after being born again should not be confused with the act of penance. And then Canon 14. Satisfaction is an act or worship of God. So when you're doing something like penance or doing something like satisfaction, you're actually worshiping God. So even though it's a physical thing or physical trial or a physical act, such as certain prayers or such as a feat or an act of charity, such as giving to the poor, when you're doing these things, you're doing them in a way to worship God. This should not be a selfish means of trying to earn merit, a gift from God. It's through grace. So when you're doing these things to get right with God, you're doing it to worship God. You're not doing it to earn your forgiveness. It's not transactional. Okay. And then finally, session 14, Canon 15. And I asked the question, who was saying this? Whom is the council countering with this canon and anathema? To bind and loose was given to the church, the apostles. So I recommend going and reading Canon 15. All right, please like and subscribe. Looks like this one's going to take some editing, so it's not going to go up tonight, but it will hopefully be up within the next few days. Talk to you all next time. Next will be at session 15. Have a good night.